Okay, it's finally gone. We are live. So, conspiracies, financial panic, 9/11, civil rights movement of the 20th century, and then we'll figure out something with, that's not a bad idea. Maybe we just do crimes, maybe 20s gangsters, that could also be good one for second semester. Nobody, only one person wanted Stalin and there are a few Hitler and fascism. Okay, and so, sound good? Pretty good topics in? Is everyone happy? All right, let's go ahead then, and would you like a little homework? The answer is yes. Did I give you guys this on Thursday? Did I think about it?
No.
Probably. Okay, there's a Vietnam War map. Wear your mask, be very careful. Okay, the map, and I'll be due on, I just put down arbitrarily in Teams on Thursday for you guys in Monday. And I think we'll have a quiz on that. And also I would like you to read this first section. And the first section is really basic theory, stuff on the beginnings of Vietnam, from Gulf to Gulf of Tonkin. And we'll go through that. And yeah, click it, take a picture. And if you can convert the picture to a PDF, that would be great. Pictures really slow down Teams. Teams is already slow. Pictures just takes forever to load. If you go on, can't you go on Notes and then make it into a PDF? Like on your phone?
Yeah, you can scan it. Yeah.
Like scan it?
Mm-hmm.
Please do that if you can't do it in the picture, but it just really slows down. Look at the last page, everybody. All right, so what I would like you to do, though, is also this. This is the basic of the assignment, but you have to find somebody to interview. So you might do it on Teams or email or telephone. This is a direct family member you can talk to, but somebody that was either, I mean, if you get a veteran of the Vietnam War, somebody who had, or one of your family members who maybe it was, they were directly related, that you had another family member you didn't know about who was a veteran of the war or involved in the anti-war movement, or just simply around to remember what was going on and there at that time. Please find them and you're going to interview them. And you're going to interview them and I'm going to give you until the end of the month to finish this. And we put to a presentation on it. So you got a while to do that. So next week, try to find somebody to interview. And this, you see the questions on here? These are your basic questions I would like you to ask. Now, some of them might not make sense. Well, we're going to watch a movie. And it's going to be, excuse me, my stupid little allergy. You know the paper masks, have you noticed? If they come out of the box, you breathe it, you have that nice little powder. Have you felt that? Okay. It makes me, I hope I'm not allergic to it. Problem is, cloth masks are almost impossible to talk to. And it's called The Fog of War. And it's a documentary about William McNamara. So we'll talk about him in a little bit, but it talks about the beginnings of the war, and it is incredibly well done. One of my favorite documentaries, about an hour and a half, so we'll take a couple days. That one, we will watch in class or on Teams, and I'll show it, and I think I still have a link to it. Somebody pirated it, not me, but I'm talking to the camera. Well, they're watching. The YouTube is always watching. But these questions will make sense here, and if they don't work, that's fine, but you just turn kind of an outline of your answers in, and then you do kind of a brief presentation, talk about your interview who you talk to. Sound good? We're getting over it. Good? I always like this. Every year, you drink of water. every year I find out that somebody, they have a relative or something they didn't know anything about. They had no idea about what they did. And so it's talking to the masses. Want me to whine a little bit more? Can I whine just a little bit more? You find out stuff about somebody you had no idea about, and learn something about your family, or a friend of yours, or a neighbor. It's always been one of my favorite assignments. So, with that, let's go ahead. So I cough. I have a little allergy. Didn't I tell you about that on Thursday?
No.
Oh, I didn't? I have an allergy. Excuse me. I have an allergy that it kind of like constricts my throat a little bit, and it'll make me cough occasionally. I don't notice it that much, but occasionally, especially when I like breathing through, let's say, a mask, I cough. So as far as I know, it's endemic. I did it last year, but I hope it's not something more. So it's going to take your notes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the myths of Vietnam and go through there. God, this is boring. Now everyone's coughing. I'm catching it. Do you like eating lunch in your fourth period?
No.
It's not,
Not that bad.
it's not that bad, but it's just 20 minutes, it's fast. And if you got people in there you don't like, that's always problematic. Yeah.
Does your throat have to be like certain foods?
Hmm?
Does your throat have to be like certain foods?
Yeah. We don't know what it is. They thought it might be gluten.
Have you ever gotten tested for BOE?
For what?
It's like it's something. It's 2E words that I can't pronounce. That's what I have. And like certain foods has like a build up of immune cells in your throat, and then like it starts to like swell up.
Yeah. Could be that. Because I had to go through the thing where they did an elimination diet for a month. I couldn't eat gluten, dairy products, eggs, or fish.
All in the same level?
All in the same month.
That's also where you eat lettuce?
Yeah, basically lettuce and it was and it's amazing how much, how everything has like gluten, wheat. You can't eat anything. Yeah, it was awful. And hopefully, the whole thought was it would go away, and it didn't go away.
Yeah, it only like 10 years ago.
Are you dying?
People thought I was. So much water went down in my throat.
Well, if someone watching it, they're going to think they have to quarantine us, right? All right, so I'll look into that. Thank you for telling me that. That could be here. So let's talk about a little bit about Vietnam War and the myths, because there's so many myths about the Vietnam War, and I hear about them all the time. And I can talk about them in class. Like in AP US History, mentioned a few of the things, but we're going through it so fast, and that was near the end. But these myths have so affected American culture. They've affected our politics. They just talk about it now, and the whole thing about the military, and a lot of that has just come up with President Trump's comments about people in the military, and since that literally has just come up again, and how he avoided going to the draft. That's another one of these historical things that came up. You know what happened? Actually, that kind of hit home to me. He was talking, and this was confirmed. You guys were living in such great times. It was so boring when I was your age.
You guys are the big. Aren't you alive now too?
You guys Everything's real. Not real. Hmm? My, so, the first American forces to really go any large-scale World War I went to this place called Bellewood, right there, to stop the German spring advance, May, June 1918. And some of the first soldiers were Marines, because they were stuck them in there, and really bloody fight. A battalion was surrounded for 8 days. It was terrible, bloody, horrible fight. But the German offensive was stopped their last gasp before large numbers of Americans overwhelmed them. And this is 1918. And the only reason I mention this is there's a cemetery there, the Ain Marne Cemetery, for the U.S. military cemetery for them. People who are buried there from that battle. But also, there's a huge battle. The first large-scale use of American forces was right here in a place called St. Mihiel. And there's a big cemetery there. And there's also World War II veterans buried there too. And my great-great-great-uncle, I never met, obviously, he was 21. And he was killed at St. Mihiel. But he's not buried at St. Mihiel. He's buried at the Ain Marne Cemetery. And so he's, that's just where he's buried. Never met him, obviously, and he was drafted like most of the World War I soldiers. And he went there, and the whole thing about what happened with President Trump is he said that he didn't want to go to that cemetery. And the reason why they came out first was he didn't want to get his hair messed up, because it was raining. But then he said that they were losers and suckers, those who were killed there. And I was thinking about that, not only, what a thing to say, but he said stuff like that before, but that's also my great-great-great-uncle. So it's even more than just that. So that was what, and then it went to him getting out of the Vietnam War, and then people started talking about the Vietnam War over the weekend, and I realized, God, these myths just keep coming around and around. And so, my reference to today's politics. By the way, I took this picture because this is a garbage picture from a video game. And I look at it, this is just total garbage. You're like, they're just playing the way they're the uniform with a flak jacket and everything, and it's humorous, except for the fact that that's like, that's Vietnam. When, no, and then what is this? Okay, moving on. But this is a more realistic picture of Vietnam. And some of the pictures, this is from, anybody know what that is? One of the most famous pictures of war, taken by a Time photographer, Pulitzer Prize winner. Do we know what's going on there? Say it again.
Trying to drink rainwater?
Say it louder, everybody.
Trying to drink rainwater?
It almost kind of looks like it, but no.
Helicopter? Waiting for a helicopter?
Yeah, wounded. He's wounded. He's sick, the helicopter. And what they're doing is bringing a stretcher down. And he's waiting for the stretcher. Does that make sense now? And this picture is going to be used time after time after time. Remember that picture. The reality is much more harsh than that, than the little dramatic shot. That poor man has a wound, it looked like in the chest. Helicopters would personify the war. And this is another one. One thing about the war, dirt. That's what people remember, especially in the Central Highlands, just mud, dirt. And because the soil has been so leached out, when it is dry, it's just gone. Every time the helicopter. And then when it's wet, it's muddy and sticks everywhere. The reality is not like this kind of dramatic scene here. So, let's get into the first couple things about it. First off, one of the great myths of the war is who the United States was fighting. Who the U.S. was fighting. Now, who would the Viet Cong?
South.
Hmm?
Was it South Vietnam?
Yeah, they were people in South Vietnam. Actually, what it means is Vietnamese communist, but they were the National Liberation Front. But these were the guerrillas that were fighting against the government of South Vietnam. That's who they were. They were civilians. And the myth goes both ways. But we talk about who they're fighting, and I've had people say we're fighting the Vietnamese. No, we were not fighting the Vietnamese. We were allied with Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, against other South Vietnamese. It was a civil war. And what were the Viet Cong fighting for? In a way, but where were they fighting from? Huh? Yeah. Unified North and South Vietnam. So in a way, to them that meant freedom, but it's one Vietnam. We were not fighting Vietnam. We were fighting to preserve South Vietnam. And the Viet Cong were the enemies who wanted one Vietnam. Now, they weren't necessarily communists. I think that's a good soldier. These are good pictures. And you see all the irregular dress. These are actually pretty amazing. They have American weapons, British weapons, Japanese weapons. Some weapons that the Chinese made copies of Russian weapons. I mean, all these kind of weapons. But one of the myths are that we're fighting the Vietnamese. Who else were we fighting? Well, let's get to the... Also, a myth. Who made up the U.S. soldiers? Who made up the American Army? What kind of people made up the Army? It's a myth, and this is why I put down this. Anybody know what this is?
No.
That's a draft card. That's his draft card. If you talk to people after the war, it is a very common myth that the majority of American soldiers were draftees. Until 1969, the majority of American soldiers were volunteers. They volunteered. A significant number were drafted, but they were volunteers. And so you have these pictures where, and these will come out implying that discipline was bad and breaking down. Oh, sure, they would do stuff like that because, especially soldiers in combat, why not? But they were mostly volunteers. Now, I should add this. And I'll talk about protesters in a second. I'll touch more. The vast majority were draftees. But what percentage of soldiers were actually in combat? What ratio? Anybody want to guess? Huh? A fourth? Much lower than that. Lower. About 1 out of 15 soldiers were actually in combat. What were most soldiers doing? You know, supply, they're in bases, medical, all the other things that went along with it. They were back in line. Most of them weren't. So the actual combat soldiers, what do you think the percentage? Remember what I told you. Most were volunteers in Vietnam. What percentage in combat do you suppose are draftees, though? Yeah, more and more as the war went on, more and more soldiers were draftees in combat, the combat soldiers. If you volunteered, you got to pick what part of the army you would be in. Or a better way to look at it is you have more of a voice. I mean, think about it. If you're in the army, you want to go to Vietnam, or I'm sorry, you're in the army and you didn't necessarily want to die in Vietnam, what would you go into? Surface-to-air missiles. Anti-aircraft missiles. Did the Viet Cong had an Air Force? So, where are you going to be? You know, they might put a surface-to-air missile base in Saigon just in case, but I know somebody who was in West Germany. He was based there. Things like that. Or your supply, you might still be out there, but my uncle, a different uncle, but he was an electrician in the army. Even though still dangerous, he was not necessarily in combat. Okay. And one more thing. It's another myth about it. But I've been told this many times about American soldiers, that's why I put this down. I've been told that the greatest percentage of soldiers were black in Vietnam. No. But a greater percentage of soldiers in combat were black by 1969. Why? Yes. Partially, but even before they ever got to before they even got to Vietnam, they were put in the infantry. They were the ones being drafted, and they were the ones who didn't have the connections to get out of the draft. They were more working class, didn't have the money. They didn't find a friendly doctor to say they had bone spurs. Yes.
If you were in college, you couldn't be drafted, right? Or was
Didn't-
that something else?
At first.
Okay.
And then they needed so many soldiers.
Okay.
You can imagine what happened. I told you Morse volunteered.
Yeah.
So there was a draft, but they didn't draft that many. As the war went on, fewer volunteered, they needed to draft them. And so then we got to start calling college. So it was college, and then certain type of college, and then graduate school, and then you could be drafted. Same thing, at first, if you're married, you weren't.
Okay.
Then they changed that, so it'd be married with kids.
So they basically just changed the rules throughout the entire system
Yeah.
to make it seem like it was fair, but they were just doing whatever they wanted to.
Exactly. In fact, when they changed it from, to married with kids, you'd be shocked how many families all of a sudden had a child 9 months after that announcement. I don't know, must just been some weird coincidence. I don't know. Historic, I don't know. But, and let's jump right to here. So if the Viet Cong was fighting, to many people the myth was, what was our enemy? So we mentioned that again in this after this scene I wanted to put in, I must have mixed up the slide, but what the heck, right? Who are those people? Those are all the enemy. Technically. According, the myth is people don't know, it's just like the vague communists were the Vietnamese. So, Viet Cong, we mentioned them before. Who's this? As the war went on, as the U.S. started sending troops into South Vietnam to intervene in the Civil War, who started sending troops to intervene in the Civil War also? To help the Viet Cong. North Vietnamese. So they started sending troops. When the U.S. sent combat troops, North Vietnam started sending combat troops. Now first, North Vietnam, they kind of ran the Viet Cong, but the Viet Cong was made up of South Vietnamese. They had advisors and political advisors. Who's that? They're watching an atomic bomb explosion. Their first one in 1961. Who is it? Good guess, but it's after that. It's 14 years after. 14, not 14, I'm sorry, 60. Yeah, after the Russians. These are the Russians. Huh? China. That's China. That's China. Was China an enemy? A decade before, the United States was full-scale war, ground combat against the Chinese. Where? Korea. A very, well, on the surface seemed similar even though it wasn't. The U.S. fought China. The People's Republic of China. They became communist in 1949. Now, China and North Vietnam didn't like each other, but to American point of view, China and so all communists were the same. And in 1961, they exploded their first atomic bomb. Yeah, there's footage of Chinese cavalry. Yes, cavalry in 1961 on horseback in gas masks, waving swords, charging at the cannon, or at the atomic bomb. we did Cold War fun, I would have showed you that footage. Maybe I'll show you that anyway, just for fun. But, China, the Soviets also sent aid to North Vietnam. They sent aid, China sent aid. They didn't like Vietnam, but that was the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. Yeah,
Did they send troops or aid?
just aid. They did send advisors. So, by 68, Hanoi is going to be rained with surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft guns to stop American bombers. And the Soviets did have their people advising. We see the same thing in Cuba, when an American U-2 plane was shot down during the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was technically Cuban, but it was a Soviet crew. And then, who's that? That's just a South Vietnamese villager who was picked up being a suspect for helping Viet Cong. Notice the tag? They would take an interrogator. And what the South Vietnamese did to prisoners was beyond imagination. With American help. But it's really complex who's the enemy. Now, let's get to another one. Who are our allies? Okay, we did not fight this alone. This is not the United States versus Vietnam. So we're talking about people just have these misconceptions or myths about it. So, we know who the United States are. Let's look at it. Who are the allies? Who's that? The South Vietnamese Army. ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. They're actually, they're Rangers. Yeah, South Vietnamese Rangers. Say it again.
Japan?
Good. Japan couldn't send troops by their constitution. They can't actually send troops outside their border. The constitution written after World War II. Yeah.
That's South Korea, right?
South Korea. Yeah. South Korea, the dictatorship in South Korea sent troops, a lot of troops, and nobody wanted to mess with the South Korean troops. I guess they were very good fighters and cruel. But doesn't it kind of make sense? We just have troops and still have troops in South Korea. They sent troops. Canada thought this was crazy. They thought we were insane for doing this. The French thought we were crazy for getting into the same mistake they got into. The British thought it was crazy. Australians.
Yeah.
And New Zealand. They sent troops, fearful of communism spreading through Indonesia. The Philippines sent some troops. Thailand sent some troops. Taiwan, which was still China then, the U.S. called it China. The U.S. did not officially recognize the People's Republic of China until 1979, the biggest country in the world. Taiwan sent some troops, but that was a little bit too messy because of the two Chinas thing. We thought that might trigger World War III, which we didn't want. I should add, throughout this entire time, see this thing right here? We were really scared that China might use this. We got too close. We were terrified of World War III the whole time. Everything we did, terrified. So, let's get to another one, the treatment of veterans. This is a myth that is pernicious, and it has been corrosive to American culture to this time. And I've been told this so many times. This is from a comic book. And there's a reason I chose this comic book. Of a hippie, and we know it's a hippie because I assume the hair is blue, but I don't know, spitting on a returning veteran. And you hear people say this all the time. Veterans got home, and they were lined up spitting on American soldiers when they came home and calling them names and stuff. And there were individual actions that stuff happened because stuff happens. But there's like massive events. I mean, I've been told this so many times. I've been told by people of a friend of mine, he was in the Navy, he talks about when he was coming in on his ship, and he said that hippies lined up, he was coming into San Francisco, Oakland Harbor, Oakland's big naval base. They were lined up on the Golden Gate Bridge, urinating on the ship as they came in. I remember being told by a nurse who came in talking about the Vietnam War Memorial. She was very, very influential in getting a monument to the nurses in Washington, D.C. So pretty amazing person. I mean, I have a lot of respect for her, but she told me about how wounded soldiers were being brought off the plane, and hippies were throwing feces and spitting on them, and these were wounded men in wheelchairs and wheelchairs or on beds, on stretchers. And stories about veterans coming off the plane and being attacked and things pelted with stuff. These mass attacks. Why do I have to show a comic book picture of this? Because it never happened. It never happened. There's no photographs of it. There's no contemporary news articles. There's no footage of this, camera. I mean, try to tell me the news networks wouldn't have had this. The newspapers would have had this. Of course they would have. I mean, this is big news. This is actually easy, cheap news to show, isn't it? Yeah.
Like the ones like bring other people like no security there.
Yeah, you're right. Wasn't there security on a base? How are the hippies, the hippies going to get on? Whatever that means. So, yeah. Oh, sure. There were individuals. Stories about one person saying it. We have a very close friend of mine after he got out of the 101st Airborne, and he went through a lot. And when he went to MSU, went to Montana State after the war, and there was this big thing on what do we do? I mean, this is actually a real argument. What do we do about soldiers, especially draftees, who are stuck in this horrible situation? We're stressed that we can't even imagine, as we all play with our mask and think we're going through stress. I'm doing it too. And they commit war crimes. Are they to blame? Isn't that a real question you should ask? And he said he was confronted by this in class. And someone said, I mean, this is pretty callous, what about the soldiers who were baby killers? That was kind of the thing. And he took it as, you're calling me, and you don't know what I went through. Okay, that kind of stuff. But that's actually, are they guilty? If you commit a crime, but the reason you committed the crime is because you're put in this horrible, stressful situation where you never get a break, and you snap, are you guilty? It's one of the problems we have after this war, that instead of dealing with real questions like that, we turn it into, well, they were just attacking soldiers, aren't they? And you never answer those questions. Do we have those same questions today? Oh, yeah. In fact, it was a big deal, because we got related to today. Last year, President Trump pardoned a soldier, a Navy SEAL, who was convicted and imprisoned for war crimes, for executing somebody. And he pardoned him as a political move. He was trying to get favor with soldiers, but it's an issue today. Yeah.
So was this myth used to defer attention from whether or not these veterans were committing war crimes?
Partially, but it's also to very much discredit the anti-war movement and to say that they're un-American. That's why I kept doing and I did quotes, the hippies. Because you see like all this talk about the protests against war, they're a bunch of drug-addled hippies, which you'll come to, which they want, yeah.
And then the question about whether you also got to think of the Nuremberg trials and stuff though, and like the Nazis a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. But that was somebody else, wasn't it? You know? I should add, were they mistreated when they got home? The soldiers were damn right they were. They were ignored. All their problems, all they went through, they were just ignored. Can you think of any worse mistreatment than that? Everyone just acted like it didn't happen. Just go away. Leave me alone. I'm really worried this is happening to people now. And on that happy note, we'll finish this tomorrow. How do you want to do the quizzes? I'm actually serious about this. Do you want me to read it, or would you rather have me put it on Teams?
Like, are you asking me whether do it in class or?
Or in class or on Teams?
What would it be
Huh?
on? Just trying to know what we did.
Like what we did last year.
Yeah.
They're kind of the same way.
You're right.
The question-
Let me think about tomorrow and I'll let you know.
And then it's just gonna be on the notes that we did today.
I don't know. I mean, I want to do a quiz about the reading. It's about the, just some basic, about the reading I assigned.
Yeah, the first page, right?
Don't worry about, I will decide tomorrow what would be the most uncomfortable for you.
That's what I was hoping to say.
See you tomorrow.
Burning in a fire and then make us do the test.
But by the way, good point about the Nuremberg trials.
Thanks.
That really is a good point.
So, quiz we're gonna talk about tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Alright.
If we have to do it in class, we won't be together. Ah! It's cold in here. All right, to anybody watching, we are done.